All right, talking to Thomas Keneally, and you are talking now to the students in my class. Would you say hello?
Hello, students, and I hope you're having a great time with these Australian films.
Is it unusual, do you think, for a course at a university to be solely on Australian cinema?
Yes, to the extent that I admire your wrong-headedness and enthusiasm in concentrating on Australian cinema. But there are great films there by directors who have made great films in Australia and America.
Well, and that 1970 to about 82 period is fertile indeed.
And that is true. And I remember... and this isn't germane for the moment, but I met Skepsy because he brought the script of The Devil's Playground to me in about 1972. And he and I were friends, and he is a man who left school, actually, about the age of 15.
There's a comparable background, I think, between the two of you.
Yes, that's right, in that we're both at an impressionable age in the church. He was studying to be a brother. I was studying to be a priest. And, of course, he escaped and I escaped. But... and that was one of the reasons he knew I'd have the fellow feeling to read his screenplay. But about The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, he approached it, as I said, as a man who'd left school at 15, but who has a great capacity to read a text. I've noticed this also, and I hope you don't mind my dragging his name in Spielberg. He has a capacity to appreciate a text and to see the film in it. And indeed, there's been some discourse between those two. And at one stage, Spielberg was thinking of Scorsese as the maker of Schindler's List, and I had dinner with Scorsese. Now, this is a very rare event for me, and I stumble over my words, as I am with you at the moment. But Scorsese told me that The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith is one of his formative movies. When he wants to go back to the springs that refresh him, it's one of the springs he visits. He didn't seem to be lying either. He knew all about it. But yes, it is written in a fairly brutal language, this book, which then conveys itself to the film. It's also written in the kind of English that Aboriginals speak. I was influenced, and have been all my life, by the fact that I spent my early years in a town where there was an Aboriginal reservation either side of town. I used to see Aboriginal kids coming past the gate on Friday afternoons when they always came to town to shop. And I was fascinated by the fact that they had to sit in a different part of the cinema.
Oh, interesting.
I was also fascinated by something that will sound funny to you, but my uncle was before the days of sewage in this country town, my uncle collected the waste material from toilets. He had a very fancy truck with golden scroll work, in which he would carry the creosoted cans, both empty and full. And he collected the waste from the Aboriginal reservation as well. And I thought, in my childish way, why is it that a white man can collect Aboriginal toilet cans but can't they can't sit near him in the cinema. It was not a moral question. It was one of those questions kids ask themselves. And so my fascination with Aboriginals lasted from that time. I didn't fully understand the culture. I was a bit reckless in writing the book from the point of view of a fully initiated but half European, half Aboriginal.
As is the case with Jimmy.
And is the case with Tommy Lewis, the man who plays Schindler's... monomaniacal, the man who plays Jimmy Blacksmith. It was a time when I wrote it, it was during Vietnam. And you might notice that there's a war going on in South Africa at the time,
right,
of the Jimmy Governor, Jimmy Blacksmith. The original for Jimmy Blacksmith was a fellow called Jimmy Governor who really existed. So there's a Boer War going on from which troops are kept back to chase Jimmy. The sort of language of the Aboriginals is, it's got some Cockney in it, it's got some grammar of their own, it's a sort of reservation English. It's a mixture of Australian argot, and it's not what Aboriginals speak now, but it's what they spoke then. And of course, I was fascinated by the part that totemic animals played in their life. And but that's why the language of the book, the dialogue of the book is, the dialogue of the film is as it is. Well, I suppose I could say the dialogue of both the book and the film is as it is. It's a very savage and brutal book and a very savage and brutal film. And the book was written by an angry young man. Myself, when I was certainly older than you guys in that class, but I was not much older. And
you are already out of the priesthood.
Oh yes. I was... I had cracked up in the priesthood. I'd lost my faith in the more arcane areas of Catholic dogma. I also wanted to meet girls. You know, as a heterosexual, I didn't fancy altar boys, and sorry, that's a nasty joke, and I shouldn't make it. But Skepsy. All my heroes begin with S. Skepsy, the Sicilian Irish Melburnian boy from Melbourne, came to me, I think, because of our similar backgrounds. And I was very impressed with that script.
About the same age, were you not?
We're about the same age.
He's a young man.
He's a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. And he talks like an Aussie plumber, but he's enormously brilliant. Even when he's made American films, he says things like Meryl Streep, for example. He says, she told me at a party once that he said to her when he first met her, "Now listen, Meryl, you old tart, what I want to tell..." But that's just the way...
She would have loved it.
That's just the way Australians tend to talk. And Fred talks like an Aussie plumber. So when he's done American films, it's taken the actors a few days. Roy Scheider told me this, to work out that Fred is actually brilliant. But he is brilliant. Now, he had gathered the money to make Schindler. God, here I go
Jimmy.
Again. I do forgive me. So many people ask me about Schindler. It's not that I'm fixated about it. It's because all the questions are
and
about...
for the record, it's Schindler's Ark, not List.
Yes. The Jimmy Blacksmith movie, he was able to make it and raise the money because of the success of his early earlier film, The Devil's Playground, which had great critical acclaim in the United States. And indeed, so did The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. It received more critical acclaim in the US from people like Pauline Kael than it did in Australia.
Now, I would have thought that the success of Devil's Playground was owing primarily to your role as Father Marshall.
No, I don't think that's true. But when I encountered that film script and said, boy, it reads so well, not that I'm an expert on film scripts, but we can all know what a story that works is. Skepsy raised the money for Devil's Playground by going round art gallery openings in Melbourne and selling $5,000 shares in the film.
Amazing.
And he made that film for $375,000. And it was both well scripted, but he also scripted it on the set, as many good directors do. So the sermon I gave about the great orb and smilingly tell the poor little kids about the great orb and a bird brushes it with its wing every 10,000 years, and when it's worn away by the bird, eternity will have just started and you'll still be in hell.
And you're smiling now.
Yes. That's the sort of thing we're told at Catholic school when we're kids, and I believe Americans of my generation were told the same sort of stuff.
Actually, John Barrymore tells a similar story about his upbringing, of all things.
And so we gathered around the night before that scene was shot, all the ruined Catholics in the cast and in the crew, and we threw in all the best metaphors we'd heard to make the substance of the script of the sermon. And I actually wrote that sermon. That's my little bit of the movie. That's the other thing about Skepsy. Just because you're a fine director doesn't mean that you're a good screenwriter, but he is. I've read a few of the screenplays he's written of movies that were never made. Screenplays based on books. There was, for example, a book by the Australian Booker Prize winning author Peter Carey, and it was called Jack Maggs.
Oh,
and
yes.
He dearly wanted to make a film of that. His career began with The Devil's Playground, and The Devil's Playground was made at a time when a kind of infection came over young Australian film people. Why can't we make our own films? Throughout the 60s, we'd been a bit dejected because the American distributors owned all the distribution, and they were very hostile to distributing Australian material, not out of malice, but because the local managers were under pressure from the studios in the US. And their job was to cover Australia with a light covering of American movies, both brilliant ones, like From Here to Eternity, and not so brilliant ones. These men and women, there's a young film student called Gillian Armstrong, who's made some splendid films. There's, of course, the young Jane Campion, who would ultimately make The Piano. Bruce Beresford, Peter Weir, Fred Skepsy, they all got infected with the concept at the same time that it was time.
And television had come along relatively lately, so there was a generation just waiting to pounce once TV was there as an apprenticeship.
Absolutely, as an apprenticeship for screenwriting. And of course, Skepsy made in industrial documentaries and commercials. And we make good commercials in Australia. It's interesting. Our beer commercials are particularly good. But, I mean, insofar as commercials are good, it's a little bit like choosing between carpets.